תודה, יונתן. הייתי מאוד שמח לעשות את כל הנאום בעברית, אבל לצערי זה לא יקרה. העברית עדיין לא שפה רשמית של האו"ם, אולי יום אחד גם זה יקרה. As with your permission, I will move to English, and the first thing I want to do is to thank Boaz for inviting us. Our partnership with the ICT celebrates 15 years. Our office exists 17 years, so one of the first partners we found was and remains the ICT, and a partnership has deepened and expanded to many, many areas. So thank you, Boaz, for your leadership, and thank you to the rest of the ICT team for being such wonderful partners. I want to thank also my colleagues from the UN, Jehangir. You know, in Hebrew, when you call someone not by Dr. Khan, by Jehangir, it's usually a big show of respect. And I want to thank you for your inspiring speech. Actually, my talk today will be a direct continuation of your speech, where I will try to zoom in on one of the trends you identified in your speech, and that will be the focus of my presentation. For those of you who are less familiar with CITED, the Counter-Terrorism Executive Directorate, is a body of professionals supporting the UN Security Council. We have several mandates. One of them is to go from country to country to assess how they comply with all the relevant Security Council resolutions on terrorism, and there are many of them. The other one, which will be the focus of this presentation, will be our mandate to identify common challenges, trends, and developments relating to counterterrorism and ways to deal with them globally. And this will be actually the focus of my talk today. I would like to zoom in on one of the challenges that Dr. Khan identified, and that is the growing link between terrorism and technology. It's not the only trends we identified. There are several we look into, but this is one was mentioned by, I think, most of the speakers I was able to hear, including from both the directors of the Shin Bet and the director of the Mossad. And I think we'll hear more and more about these new trends, and for a good reason. So what are the relations between terrorists and technology? In general, our assessment is that terrorists are what we could describe as early adopters of new technology. The younger the terrorist generation goes, the more savvy and adapt they are to new technologies, the more they are ready to use them. Sometimes, or very often, before the companies that develop those technologies are aware of the risk of their potential abuse. And this is a point that I will get back to it. It doesn't mean that technologies are bad, of course. Technologies contribute enormously to the development and enjoyment of life, to supporting connectivity, to supporting economies, and to all of us being able to communicate far better and far more efficiently with each other. But at the same time, as I said, technologies can be abused. By the way, they can be abused not just by terrorists, they can also be abused by law enforcement and security services, and I will say a few words about such abuse later in my intervention. So what we need to do is to first understand the threat. Understand first that not all technologies are bad, understand that terrorists are early adopters, and try to map those technologies that are being used by terrorists or can potentially be used. So the bulk of my intervention would be focused on this mapping, what we're seeing from New York, what we're seeing through our partners. One of our key partners are the research community, and I know there are many of you who belong to the research community, and we have very strong relations with the research community through an establishment, a network. Then I think Boaz always keeps saying that you need a network to beat a network. We developed a network which we call the Global Research Network, that consisted of 110 terrorism-related research institutes. And those of you who are not yet members of the research networks are very welcome to reach out to us and become members. It's a very dynamic network. We feel we benefit tremendously from it, but I think that also the researchers who are members of the network benefit from meeting other researchers, but also being able to make their research relevant to policymakers at the global level. So Dr. Khan touched on several new trends that we have identified. That allows me to glimpse through them very quickly and focus on some of the responses. Indeed, one of the most concerning development is the growing use of UAS, drones by terrorist organizations. We see it on many fronts. CITED has identified this new threat as early as 2019, when we issued a public report that was very well received as a new trend, something that needs to be looked deeper into. And what we're seeing since then is more and more use of this technology. It's being used by terrorists for propaganda. It is used in order to strike at enemies. Civilian infrastructure in particular is much more vulnerable to such a threat, and we've seen attacks committed across the world by terrorist organizations using UAS. In East Africa, we've seen an Al-Qaeda-aligned group operating from Somalia continue to expand its little reach in the country through drones. We've seen Al-Shabaab that significantly increased its use of drones to conduct reconnaissance, flyovers, and record activities of security forces. We also have seen threats to low-flying civil aviation through the use of UAS, and we also have seen such use in northern Mozambique. And of course, in the Middle East, ISIL has adopted smaller drones, mostly quadcopters, which were used in the Battle of Mosul and other offenses. Lastly, of course, I cannot but mention the use of drones by Houthi groups who launched numerous cross-border attacks using UAS and missiles on civilians and civilian infrastructures in the Gulf. So this is one clear new use of technologies that we need to look at. A second one was mentioned, so it allows me also to refer to it. It was mentioned time and again, is the use of ICT technologies. It's being used actually since Al-Qaeda was founded, and we still remember the days where DVD cassettes were dropped in front of Al Jazeera offices in Doha, then promulgated the Al-Qaeda message around the world. In 2012, ISIL has mastered the use of social media in order to conduct almost everything related to those attacks, from incitement to recruitment to even coordination of attacks through the use of ICT. We recently, I don't know if you have seen the latest report from the Wall Street Journals, that ISIL has started the use of NFTs, which are blockchain-enabled technologies, in order to promulgate its messages by actually owning an NFT with ISIL propaganda. Future trends in this regard may include the use of the metaverse. We haven't seen it already by ISIL, but we are seeing growing use of the metaverse by extreme right-wing or REMT, as it usually called. This allows for decentralized communication in order to recruit, in order to even simulate attacks and their orchestration through the use of virtual reality tools. Terrorists continue to use VPN and encrypted technologies. This is a topic that I think will be discussed later today. It was also mentioned by some of the speakers. We're seeing this growing use, and we're seeing also the challenge of law enforcement community and security services still to find access to these tools. The dark web is continuously used, as well as 3D printing. In several attacks recently, we have seen the use of 3D printed ammunition and guns. In particular, we've seen it in the attack in Germany over at the synagogue, where there was an attempt to build a gun through the use of 3D printer. It wasn't successfully executed, so it didn't work. But now you can easily download the code that will allow anyone to print a gun at its home or in any location it wishes to. And that code apparently is even protected by the First Amendment, so there is no way to just take it down. That was a decision of a court. I will go quickly through a few more trends that we have able to identify. First is the use of cryptocurrencies. I mentioned NFT just before. It is used by ISIL for propaganda, but nothing prevents it from trying to use it for the purpose of funding its activities. We've seen other organizations, including Al-Qaeda and ISIL, using crypto, and certainly on the extreme right, we see that as commonly used. And other trends we're seeing are the use of, the potential use, I would say, of autonomous vehicles. Bear in mind that cars becoming more and more autonomous, and we could see potentially the same attacks as were executed in Barcelona or Nice, if you recall, through the use of trucks, can be used through the use of autonomous vehicles or remotely controlled. And actually, there was even one case in 2018 where ISIL committed attacks through cars that were quite a simple manner, remotely controlled, and then reached their destination. We mentioned the possibility of use of artificial intelligence. ISIL and Al-Qaeda are already using artificial intelligence for several applications. First is the use of deep fakes to create flawed identities or fraud identities. They also use artificial intelligence in order to better recruit and target and identify individuals' potential for recruitment. They also are using bots in order to amplify their message. So this may sound like a very, very concerning development, and we are seeing as I said, a growing link between terrorists and technology. What are we doing? And I will speak only on what CITED is doing. There are many, many initiatives happening within the UN and others, and Dr. Khan mentioned a major undertaking that his office is taking, but from CITED, the first thing we're doing is to identify the trends and make sure that policymakers understand the severity of the trend in order for them to be able to develop policy responses. And in order to allow these policy responses, the Counter-Terrorism Committee of the UN Security Council has decided to hold a special meeting in Delhi and in Mumbai, actually, where the entire Security Council will move for 3 days to India to have a special meeting dedicated to 3 identified trends. One is drones, the other one is cryptocurrencies, and the third one is ICT, that have been identified as the major areas where global response is needed. Key to that will be the agreement, and again, it will be discussed, on governing principles that could allow all of us to feel safer in using these technologies. This principle will include, of course, the respect for human rights that are come with the use of these technologies. For many people, the use of information technology is the main enabler of their freedom of expression. This is how they communicate, this is how they express their views, and we need to make sure that whatever solutions are offered, they not infringe on civil liberties. Second principle that will govern this engagement will be public-private partnership. It's clear to all of us in the field that any solutions will not come only from governments. They have to be developed in close cooperation with the private sector. The private sector understands the technology more than governments. The private sector also understands how the technology can be used and how it can be abused. And the private sector will also be able to offer solutions that can actually work. One excellent example in this regard is 2 initiatives that our office were deeply involved in. One is called the GIFCT, the Global Internet Forum on Counter-Terrorism, where we brought together with the UN, with governments, and with civil society the 4 major platforms, YouTube, Microsoft, Twitter, and Facebook, to sit together and work together with governments on finding common solutions. Another one, which will be the next speaker, working very closely with our office, is Tech Against Terrorism, and you'll be hearing from Adam very soon. And thank you, Adam, for being with us today. Another and last solution is governance. Regardless of the wish of companies to find solutions, governance is a key issue, and that would be one of the purposes of this meeting, which I hope many of you will be able, if not join us in reality, join us virtually, to find solutions, to find governance solutions that actually work and allow the companies and all of us to feel safer in using those technologies. My time is up, and I think the next speaker is waiting there. So thank you very much for inviting Seated. Thank you, Boaz, for having us, and we look forward